Hooray, hooray. Good. Well, oh my goodness, it's so tiny I'll never be able to read my own notes. Last time we spent a lot of time talking about Loki, and we saw him as a difficult figure because in some way he was a general troublemaker. But then he was also very much of a problem solver. He is clearly a Saturnian figure, from on one hand being a very selfish motivator, and on the other hand very much of a negator. And in this role as a negator, he polarizes quite a few other beings. We saw, first of all, how he polarized Freya, and that we said that Freya was the Venus of the Norse, and that the polarization of Loki and Freya represented the polarization of love and hate, of forgiveness and vengeance. He's famous for an even more robust polarization than that polarization of love and hate. And that polarity is polarity of darkness and light, and the polarity of death and life, which is just about as fundamental as you can get, darkness and light. In this polarity, Loki is, as hated as he is, he's all the more hateful, and he is polarized against a being that is the most universally beloved of all of the northern European gods, Balder. Balder was known to the Teutonics as Palter, and some people knew him as Phol, P-H-O-L, and some people knew him as Foresight. The name Balder literally means bright. It is, since we spent that long time talking about piebaldness, the pie part comes from magpie, which is black, and the bald comes from Balder. So piebald literally means light and dark. But it goes much further than that, because from the name Balder is also where our word bold comes from. And in this sense, Balder is sort of like the Latin audax, from which our audacious comes from. Yes, yes. Balderdash is bold speech. Yes, yes. The kind. It's not quite. It's more. It's not braggartry, because braggartry comes from braggy, the Northern European god of poetry and of boasting. Balder is more like a proud, strong, bold daring kind of speech. It even goes so far that his wife is called Nana, N-A-N-N-A, and one of her names is daring. So a lot of our words come right from all of our words actually come from the names of gods, from one language or another, that will all derive from the gods, and the character of the gods through their words become the names. He is described as a perfectly formed being, very bright and with great beauty. He's radiant. This is especially true in the Teutonic languages, where the name for beauty and the name for shining are exactly the same thing. Schön. It is a meaning that is something akin to our word like shine or sheen, and it literally means that the light of truth shines through from within. This is associated with the life spirit. If the divine spirit is associated with the good, and the beauty is associated with the life spirit, and the human spirit is associated with truth because it has to do with the thinking principle. So it is associated with the sun as the second attribute of the divine. And in this regard, it also has to do, if we remember from about 2 years ago when we were talking about the three attributes of the Spirit relative to Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiv. Vishnu, who represents the second attribute, the sun attribute, is related to Lakshmi, or Lux, which is where that kind of shining beauty or luxury comes from. Obviously, Balder is blonde. He's so blonde that the hair of his eyebrows is white. And it is said that the eyebrows of Balder are the brows of light or the brows of truth. And that brings us back to something from the very first talk that we had, talking about Ginnungagap and Ymir. We said that the Midgard was built out of the eyebrows of Ymir, and that the eyebrows of Ymir were transformed into the Midgard, which became the abode of humans. And we are the thinking ones. And so there is associated with the eyebrows all connotations of thought. In fact, some people, like some physiognomists, including Rudolf Steiner, break all expressions into variants of two types of expression. One being the expression of pain, and one being the expression of relaxation. The expression of relaxation is like what happens when you have an intuitive hit, and it's so strong that everything sort of relaxes, and even your jaw seems to fall open from that kind of intuitive experience. The other experience is the process of thought. And according to Rudolf Steiner, which fits perfectly into the notion of the fall of humanity, that thought is crystallized pain. It is we gain the knowledge of good and evil at the same time that we gain the knowledge of pain and pleasure, and at the same time that we were developing our minds. And so the more deeply concentrated we become, the more our brows become knurled, and the more we get wrinkled lines in the center of our forehead, vertical wrinkled lines. And you can see this in everything from jazz musicians making very beautiful music with extremely pained looks on their face. So Balder is associated with the eyebrows. The eyebrows of Balder are associated with truth. Oh, we're going along so fast. We're already 1/6 of the way through the notes. This will be a easy night, I guess. We maybe Balder is associated as much with the Milky Way as Odin Wotan is. Remember that the Milky Way was literally the way that Odin rode his cart down. Balder lives in the Milky Way. That's where he has his whole abode, only it isn't called the Milky Way then. It's called by a different name. It's called a Breidablik, meaning bright moment, or a bright flash or something like that. He has a famous dwelling there, and in that dwelling is where we get another one of our words. The name of his hall, the Northern Europeans liked halls rather than houses with separate rooms. And I think that's where that socialistic tendency comes from. There's not that need for privacy, but everybody gathers together in large halls and to keep each other warm or something like that. Who? Okay, we're back. His hall was called Glitner, which is where our word glitter comes from, all tied together. And he was so solar, Balder was, that he ruled the midsummer. The whole midsummer festival was sacred to Balder. He is thus associated then with cycles of light and cycles of life, and is associated with them in annual cycles and even diurnal cycles. There are stories about him going for rides with his father, and at which time he rides a lame horse and heals it and such like that. I'm cutting material here because I don't want to be too long. His association is, and his description is very much like Apollo. Because remember, Apollo was light and bright and beautiful, and the ideal of the Greek sculptors was to produce the most beautiful body in producing an Apollo. He also opens up, like Apollo, he's a healer, in that he opens up fountains or vortices in the world during the course of battles. A lot of the other gods are more warlike and more battlesome, but he provides life and light, and because he is so much associated with life, he's not associated with warfare, with killing or with destruction or anything like that. Instead, he is the healer when these things have to take place. Now, the ironic thing, which gets us to the whole big thing that we're going to talk tonight about, it's all going to be tied together, is that even though Balder is famous for being loved as a lord of light and of life, he's most famous for his death. The death of Balder is central to the whole myth of the Northern Europeans, because the Northern Europeans were something like the Mayas, in that the Aztecs. The Aztecs had their whole calendar geared to a date off in the future, and that date off in the future is when their culture ended, when they were wiped out by Cortez, under an exceedingly long and devastating conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter. The Norse mythology, even though it has a creation story, is most famous because it has a destruction story. And more than any other mythology, it is focused toward destruction, gloom, and doom, and toward the end of things rather than toward the beginning of things. I think that there is something about this. We've been saying all along that Northern European culture is much more frontal, and it's much more inductively frontal, and it has in its mythology much more science. And this would go right along with the whole idea that more of the consciousness would be centered in the regions that were not so much libidinous, because they're not a very sexual mythology at all, but it is much more dealing with problems of moral judgment of right and wrong and concern about the future. And this concern about the future comes in talking about the death of the universe. And we'll read the first part of what we're going to read tonight. It is a whole section that is sometimes called the Twilight of the Gods, but probably a much better description is the Doom of the Gods. Because this is a very brief version. I don't have a really thorough version anywhere in detail, and I'm going to try and get a prose edda somewhere. I'm sure there must be someone in print somewhere. All right, the Doom of the Gods, which begins with part 1, the death of Balder. Now, the prose edda, which was written down, as we said in the very first talk, by Snorri Sturluson, is narrated, and the narrator's name is Gangleri, and so you need that piece of information so that this makes sense a little bit. Next, Gangleri learned of the event which led to the destruction of the earth and of Asgard, the death of Balder, the beautiful Balder, the son of Odin, had ominous dreams, and the gods, fearing that danger threatened him, sent Frigg to extract an oath from all things on earth, whether living creatures, plants, or things of metal, wood, and stone, that they would do no harm to Balder. After this they found it amusing to fling darts and hurl heavy objects at Balder, knowing that they could do him no hurt. But Loki took on the disguise of a woman and talked with Frigg. He learned that one little plant, the mistletoe, had taken no oath, since Frigg had thought it too young to threaten Balder. Filled with spite, Loki pulled up the mistletoe and persuaded Hoder, the blind god, to throw it at Balder in sport, guiding his hand as he threw. The dart pierced Balder through, and he fell dead to the earth. Bitter indeed was the grief of the Aesir, and Odin's most bitter of all, since he alone knew the extent of the loss they had suffered. Balder is the son of Odin. Odin has taken the drink from the fountain, and he knows what the future is. Frigg begged that someone would ride to the kingdom of death and bring Balder back to them. Hermod, another of Odin's son, agreed to make the perilous journey, riding Odin's horse Sleipnir. The gods meanwhile took up Balder's body and laid it on a pyre built on his own ship, Hringhorni, and a giantess pushed it off the rollers into the sea, and there Balder was burned on the pyre with his wife Nanna, who had died of grief, and his horse beside him. Odin laid the gold ring Draupnir, one of the great treasures of the gods, upon the pyre as a last gift, and all the gods and goddesses came to Balder's funeral. It's going to be a tough night for me. Oh, boy. The quality of Balder, as the quality of brightness and of light and of life, is something that permeates all of us and everything that lives or in the land of light. And that is ultimately any of us who live in the land of darkness and who live in the land of death, where we see things as an end and we learn things by killing them and taking them apart, eventually we have to take a pledge of life, the Balder Pledge, which is not just a pledge to harmlessness, nor is it a pledge to nonviolence or non-killing, but to life, which is a much, much more powerful thing. All of the gods and all of the beings that live within and for the sake of God have a pledge of life. This pledge of life is literally resonating to and living out the word of life. It's a pledge of everything that exists in the cosmos to live and to support life and to grow and to move things forward. Now, what happens in the story is what also happens in our lives. I don't know about you, but what usually brings me past the epitome of a cycle and into the downward phase of a cycle, that's always marked by overconfidence. When things are going well and things are smooth and you think you're on a roll and you think you did it, that leads to something superfluous. That's vanity, the self-love, or the worshipping of ourselves as being such great beings is unnecessary. And to use Occam's razor, it is vain to do with more what can be done with less. And this vanity leads to the kind of overconfidence that brings about the downfall. It is common to all tragedies. The tragedy of the Greeks had all kinds of hubris, which came to be known as the pride before the fall. So this playing around and making a game of it all and throwing boulders at Balder, and so there was Boulder Dash as well as Balder Dash. Indicates a kind of consciousness that, at least in us, usually means trouble. Loki takes on a feminine form, and that means he takes on the form of a receptor. And this is pretty much his general stance. Saturn is more of a feminine planet than it is a masculine planet. It is a receiver of life, and it receives life until life has no more to give. It's really interesting that what comes out of this, it shows that relative to the absolute and how matter and nature and the feminine are associated with that unspeakable absolute, that the matter and the world of limitations in a way is more immortal than life, because life is associated with the spirit, and that seems to be infinite, it seems to be eternal, and it seems to be divine. But what actually happens is that eventually even the Supreme Being goes to sleep. And what it goes to sleep in is the night of the Absolute. And so in a very peculiar way then, there is a very interesting kind of inversion that darkness and matter has in its own way an immortality that exceeds the apparent immortality of the spirit, which seems to go on because of its kind of, I don't know how you would say it, its awakeness that folds back on itself. Now, it's interesting that Frigg, who is in the German called Fricka, is the oath taker. Now, Fricka is associated, or Frigg is associated with the 7th house and with Libra, which has to do with oaths, and it also has to do with feminine receptivity, which is really interesting because it is receptivity, the ability to receive something and hold it, which is a very feminine capacity, that makes oaths possible. Oaths are like memory. Memory is that which can receive the impression of intelligence, the impression of creative expression. It's malleable enough to receive it, but firm enough to hold it. So the oath depends not so much on the spoken word, which is the nature of the gods who live and continue to live in a perpetual rebirth of life and continue to live in a perpetual rebirth of light. It's a constant state of divine self-discovery that the gods live in, and it's perpetually new and changing. But the realm of memories and the realm of feedback makes this to be that the feedback comes from memory, which comes from that which holds, in a way, the life of the gods in an impressed state, in a negative state, and makes that all possible. It's interesting because, as we said earlier, the doom of the gods is also sometimes called the twilight of the gods. And it is all done relative to an oath, and it's all done relative to an ending, which is associated with Frigg, who is associated with the 7th house, which is the twilight of the day, and Libra, which is the twilight of the summer, when all the lovely colors, instead of being in the sunset, are in the trees. Then we have to talk about mistletoe. Mistletoe is probably the most unique plant of all plants, especially to the northern Europeans. It even went as far as into Greece. It was especially sacred to the Druids, and especially oak mistletoe, because the mistletoe is determined by what type of tree that it grows in. Now, mistletoe was sacred to all of the mysteries, partly because it has psychedelic properties. And very early, before the times of Christ, psychedelics were part of the mysteries. Wine as one thing to test the person, but mushrooms and marijuana and things like that were used in mysteries to loosen people up from the body and to get them associated with the inner world more than with the outer world, with that type of consciousness. Now it's dangerous to use them because they put a particular slant or a twist on the consciousness that it isn't a free consciousness, and we don't need that push anymore. It has a property that is most unique and unpredictable. It brings about peace at the same time that it brings around an in-touchness with the inner worlds. It was well known for a long time that if you have a piece of mistletoe and you hold it in the palms of your hands or roll it in the palm of your hand, if you're an epileptic, it calms you down from having epileptic seizures and makes them less likely. That was one of the herbal remedies for epilepsy before we had the type of medicine that we have now. A small sprig of mistletoe may very well have been the golden bough. The legend has it in all the mystery schools that in order to enter and pass through the world of the dead to get to the true spiritual worlds, you had to be ferried across the river of death. And it is such a thing that the ferryman, or whoever is the warder of the kingdom of the dead, demands payment, demands that you give something up that represents all of your material things. The thing that allowed the initiates to pass into the inner world is that they carried a small sprig of a golden bough. This is a very deep myth which we won't go into, but it has to do that we have, before we can confront death and before we can pass through death without being frightened and paralyzed by it and hardened into an irremediable fixation with death, we have to realize our association with life. And that can only be done by understanding ourselves as having a useful purpose in life. And the golden bough represented that we knew that we were our own little sprig of the tree of life. And having that knowledge in ourselves that we had a divine purpose and that we lived and would continue to live is what brought us past the warden of the world of the dead. Now, mistletoe is very unique. And there have been scientific studies that have borne out the herbalists. The herbalists have claimed for several hundred years that unlike having planetary rulerships like other plants do, some plants are ruled by the sun or by Aries or by Leo or such like that. Mistletoe, you would harvest herbs in a time that was harmonious so that their rulership was strengthened so that they could best bring out their qualities, their native qualities. In fact, there were several reasons, several conditions in harvesting herbs. You had to harvest them when the chemistry of them was just right. So some of them you harvested before they flowered, and some when they were in flower, and some after they flowered, and such like that. And the chemistry always changes according to what the activity is in the plant. But so that was one factor, and the astral conditions were another factor. You wanted to harvest an herb when it was in its prime. But mistletoe was unique. Mistletoe was like the Neptune of the plants, in that mistletoe took on the characteristics of the time that it was harvested. There is a lovely book it's not a lovely book, it's a lot of graphs, and it's pretty tedious, but it's by a lady called Agnes Fife, who has done biochemical studies of the effects of mistletoe when it is harvested at different phases of the moon or with the moon in different signs, and is shown by graphs that the effect, even within the life stuff of the mistletoe itself, varies according to the astrological conditions. It is one of the plants that the anthroposophists use in anthroposophical medicine for controlling cancer. It can curb the growth of cancer. All this is due to the fact that mistletoe is supposedly the first plant to have a desire body. That is to approach the animal-like condition. And when it has the desire body, it is then responds to the astral conditions where the animal group spirits live, and with that are behind astrology. And so that's why it has all these different astral influences. Also, trees keep growing and growing and growing. They never stop growing as long as they live. However, everything that has a plant stops growing. There's something about the desire force that has the ability to close the open-ended growth of the form. This is, of course, associated with the reflection. The vital body, the etheric vital body, is associated with the life spirit. And it's uniform, and it is continuous. It is pure spirit, and that life never ends. But the human spirit, which is reflected in the desire world, has a limitation. It has a selfhood. It still deals with universal ideas, but not universal ideas that cover all truth, but only those that are represented by the formula or by that idea. So these are why the mistletoe has an effect. It has an herbal effect in that it can work on our vital bodies through the etheric, but because there are direct astral influences, it can curb excessive growth. Now, when this requires something on the part of the, you might say, the vanguard of the plant kingdom. Whenever something is very advanced and it goes beyond the normal state, it requires sacrifice. And the sacrifice that is made by the mistletoe is that it is a parasite. It sacrifices roots, because roots are what keep it associated with an even more limited sphere, the physical earth. And the physical earth is the reflection of the divine spirit, and in the same way that the divine spirit is so bright that it is dark, the physical earth is so singular or so tied together that it is opaque. And the mineral kingdom is all tied together in the same way that the life of the plant kingdom is continuous. And in order to get free from the influences of the etheric energy that rises out of the earth, in that which we've been calling the Persephonic cycle, the plant has to, in order to get to be able to feel desire and respond to the horizontal forces that circulate around the earth, the plant has to get itself out of the earth and more horizontal, so it has no roots. And so what it does, it has no roots that are in the earth. It puts its roots inside the bark of the tree that it grows in, and it saps all of its life from the tree. And therefore, it takes the character of the tree that it is growing on. That's why oak, being sacred to Zeus as the demiurge, was considered the most sacred of all of the trees to the Greeks, who were very Zeus-oriented, and that's why oak mistletoe was so important to them. So it's a deadly parasite. Now, parasites, as used by the mysteries, means something different than parasites that, as it is meant by biology in material science. Yes, mistletoe is a parasite in both senses of the word, the mystery sense and the biological sense, because it derives its life completely from another being, and it will kill that other being, being dependent on it. But it is a parasite in the sense, parasite is not the right word. You might say para-kingdom, in that it goes beyond its kingdom. And this is a half step. It's a stage that is between what it is coming out of and what it is going toward. And all parasites require sacrifice and the ability to do something new. So there has to be a receptivity and a sacrifice at the same time. And in the case of the mistletoe, It is the sacrifice of the connection with the earth and the receptivity to the animal astral types of forces. The closest thing to a parasite in the use of the word as the mysteries use it would be a pet. Not something like an animal that gets in your guts and sucks the life out of you. That's the biological sense of the word of a parasite. Like a tapeworm is a parasite. Pets are parasites in that they leave the control of the guiding group spirit. They sacrifice the instinctual intelligence that comes from the group spirit. And what they develop is some kind of a quasi-thinking ability. And that quasi-thinking ability is what gives them the ability to communicate with us. So thinking about that, what then are human parasites? I'm sorry to use the word, but that's the only word that we use in the kingdom. In the distinguishing things about humans are mortality. Isn't that how the statement goes? All humans are mortal. The other statement is humans are the rational animals. And the other statement is humans are the only beings capable of speech. That is a symbolic or a trans-symbolic abstract language. So there is an element of sacrifice to go beyond the human state. We have to sacrifice thought. This doesn't mean that we stop thinking, that we carry, but that we do carry thought as far as we can, because that is what our gift, our service is to the world, is to think. The gift of the plants is to give life and vitality in a way that humans or animals can't. All humans and animals eventually need the life that comes from the plants. The gift that is given, or the service that is given by the animals, is to give pure emotions and to be an embodiment of the basic emotional types of experience, which are indicated by the signs of the zodiac. What humans give as a service is thought. We are the beings that think about the world and concretize our thoughts, and in that we serve and give to the world. But if we want to go beyond the human state, we have to have wisdom. And that wisdom is when we reach beyond thought to the stuff that thought wraps itself around, which is intuition. And the more we learn to sacrifice a all too human, separative, brain-like concentration to the reception of pure intuition, the more we are becoming human parasites. We also have to sacrifice the basic human condition of death, because we have to learn to create on the fly and to continue to create and to continue to live without the rest and relaxation that comes with death. So we have to be perpetually doing all of the things that are involved in rebirth and all of the things that are involved in dying and assimilating. And the more that we do these things, the more we get beyond the necessity of dying. And so then, we have to be able to sacrifice the normal human condition. In order to get to perpetual life, and in order to get to pure intuition, we have to get even beyond the conception of self, which is itself an idea, the higher kind of thought. And this means we have to sacrifice the human condition so that we in no wise think of self at all, and that our whole orientation is to the sacrificial, because as humans, we are at the turning point of the cosmos. We are finished with being creatures and we're becoming divine. We have carried individuation and separation as far as it can go, and now we have to turn around and reunify. And that means that for us, the sacrifice is not just a sacrifice of a particular quality, but it is a sacrifice to sacrifice itself. And, which means the attunement to the life experience, to the life spirit, and to the living of a selfless life. Doesn't mean that we still don't have a self, but that we see that self from the viewpoint of the way all selves are seen in that selfness. All right, so that's sort of what's necessary. It leads us eventually to a burdenless activity, and it leads us to living beyond or living in giving ourselves to the processes that take place in death. That is the unwinding and reassimilation and the rewinding into the new birth. And if we do these things perpetually, we then sacrifice death. All right. We're going to have to hold something back. Just remember, Hoder, who is in the German or Teutonic languages, is called Hother. He's the blind god. We're going to come back to that. One version of this story has it that Hel is so eager. She herself is in love with Balder, and she is so eager that she appears in the upper world just before his death. She's so eager for him. We're going to remember that also. And she's so eager that she did receive and hold him, and that leads us to the second of our three parts, and that is Hermod's ride to Hel. To get the body of Balder back so that the gods can take joy in life again. The detail isn't given in here, but it takes 9 nights to reach to reach there. Hermod's ride to Hel. Meanwhile, Hermod had been riding down the dark road to the land of the dead and over the bridge that spanned the resounding river. There was a maid, Modgud, guarding this bridge, and she came out in wonder to see who came riding with such noise and tumult. Balder, she said, had already passed that way, and the 5 troops of the dead, but this newcomer was not like such travelers, for he had the aspect of a living man. At last Hermod reached Helgate, and Sleipnir leaped over it with ease. The hall of Hel stood open before them, and Balder was sitting in the high chair. Hel was willing to release him on the condition that all things in the world, living or dead, would weep for him. But should any creature refuse to weep, she said, then he must stay with her and never go back to the Aesir. So Hermod bade farewell to Balder, who gave him Draupnir to bear back to Odin, and many rich gifts besides, and returned with Hel's answer. Remember, Draupner is the gold ring, which we're going to get to toward the very end. At the summons of the gods, all things did weep for Balder, men and beasts, stones and metals, in the way that we see all things weep after frost when the air grows warm again. Yes, it's an important, beautifully poetic detail. But at last the messenger of the gods came to a giantess alone in a cave. When they asked her to weep for Balder, her reply was a deadly one. Alive or dead, the old man's son has been no use to me. Let hell hold what she has. It was believed that this giantess was no other than Loki himself, seeking in his malice to keep Balder in hell. All the while I worked on these notes, I knew exactly what Ela's response was going to be at every step of the way. Oh, it's great. Yes. No, I know that you put yourself right into the feeling of the stories, and that's why I can understand that you're going to know what the whole psychology of it is. The Aesir were so wrathful that Loki knew that this time he had no hope of mercy if they caught him. So he So he fled from them, built a house with doors looking out in every direction, and then changed himself into a salmon in the river. Oh, you haven't heard the beginning of it yet. It comes to now. Now we really get to the fate of fate. But Kvasir, Kvasir, the wisest of the Aesir, found some ashes on the hearth where Loki had been burning a net, and from the shape of this he realized that this was the only way to catch the nimble salmon. They made the net to Loki's pattern, and at the third try they caught him by the tail. Loki was then bound across 3 flat stones, held down by the entrails of one of his own sons. There he was left to writhe beneath the mouth of a snake, which dropped its poison onto his face. His faithful wife, Sigyn, sat with a bowl to catch the drops of poison, but each time she went to empty it, the poison fell on Loki again, and his struggles caused the earth to shake. This is the origin of earthquakes, as we mentioned last time. It's a powerful, powerfully gruesome story. Oh. Well, in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the moment of death becomes all important. Because, according to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, at that moment, if you can remember who you are or where you come from, you can completely liberate yourself from all of the whole wheel of rebirth. That is, of dying and remembrance and of being reborn from the spirit all the way back to earth. In the Rosicrucian mysteries, we know that in the third heaven we have an experience of ourselves as God, and when we are connected with that divine part of our being, we are connected with the idea that is behind the whole cosmos and everything that is in it. And when we are filled with that glimpse of creation and our divine part in it, we are filled with an inspiration that causes us to come back to birth again. These two vantage points, the vantage point of, someday I'm going to have this whole tray lined with, how could I possibly do that? I'll have to use a fragment. So then, these represent 2 points of view. One, from third heaven, we spin and wind ourselves into matter. And we wind as far as we can possibly go until we give up the ghost and we just don't have the spirit to go further. Then we unwind until we are at the epitome of what the possibility of the human state. We are as high as we can go. We are as deep in the spiritual realms as we can go. Each of them gives a different point of view. At the moment of death, we understand the human condition in a way that has all of the humility and all of the acceptance of the reality of what the material condition is like, where we are bound to the limitation. From the other point of view, from third heaven, we recognize as much as it is possible for us now what it is like to be divine, and we are filled like the gods when they throw boulders at Balder. This sounds almost like, yes, we are filled with the Spirit. These are two very unique points of view. Each of them, from its own point of view, sees the other extreme as the underworld. We go back 5 years now to when we talked about Orpheus. From the viewpoint of the earth, we see the underworld as that which is beneath the surface that we normally see things on. In the underworld, we see what the inner person is like. From the viewpoint of the Spirit in third heaven, this is the underworld, because everything is below it. It is in this ebullient, spiritual, floating, uplifted spiritual state, and everything else is like an anchor. So the underworld is this world. And this is remember when we talked about the mysteries, that according to the Platonists, this is our sarcophagus. Our physical body is our tomb in which we live in the clay, and we live in the land of the dead, and we need to be uplifted out of that. Now, each of these myths, each of these ways of looking at it is true. They are unique moments in our career, in our spiritual state, that at these 2 points, when everything stops, when we no longer are looking forward to anything, and it's impossible to look forward to anything, everything comes to a stop. Or when we are at one and there is no time and we are in an eternal state and there's nothing to let go of anymore, there's nothing to unwind from, we're completely unwound and relaxed, there is a stopped activity. And in those stopped activities, they are just like the intuitive states when we're busy thinking, and then we relax a second, and then the intuition comes in full, and we can see the reality of things with amazing clarity, and life or death or being born or dying or nothing else counts, because in these moments we have a peace and a clarity that is in a stopped action state. It is truly eternal in that way. Now, the Norse are Enneatic just in a way that is different than the Greeks were Enneatic. Remember last year when we looked at all of this Neoplatonism, we found triangles all matched together into 3 sets of 3s, and there were always 9s. The Norse used the number 9 in a different way. We're talking about the 9 days of Hermod's ride into hell, or to hell. The whole idea here is, well, I'll just mention it now. We're going to go into it more in detail later, toward the end of the evening, that 7 represents a number of spectral completion. 8 means going beyond the point that if you continue with the cycle into the 8th, it is a realm of destruction. The 8th sphere is always called the death and destruction. The 9th represents a new life beyond it, a resurrection to a new life, like a whole new cycle. That is the way that the Norse looked at it. In this regard, the work of the year in terms of nature is done in the first 7 signs. In the 8th, in the number 8, we pass into Scorpio in the 8th house, into a realm of death. And then in the 9th, we pass into a spiritual sphere of the last signs, which include the 8th as well, that have to do with the spiritual assimilation work, which in itself is a great spiritual activity, or a great creative activity. Now, Niflhel is the 9th world. And Niflhel, it relates to the turnaround. Obviously, the place of the dead is Scorpio, or it is the 8th house. And that is associated with the point of turnaround. So that the 9th house indeed represents resurrection. It's a whole change of a cycle where something totally new is done. This is something that if we are in tune with it, like if we are in tune with our variation, and our variation gets attuned to the cosmic cycle, this has to do with the sacrum, at the base of the spine, because there is a ray or a germ from the sun that enters us and it works its way down the spine till it gets to the sacrum, which is our Niflhel. And Scorpio is always the place of life and death. It is where a turnaround begins. So when the force gets down to the Scorpio area, what happens there in the sacrum is it's a black box to us, and we probably won't know it until we get to the greater mysteries. But at this point, the energy that comes down to us from the sun is united with a lunar force, which in some ways is seen as a deathly force, and this is what rises back up the spine. And in the conscious bringing it up to the spine by calling it from the top or coming from the top down is what is related to our opening up of spiritual vision, the opening up of the different neuroplexes in the etheric world called chakras, and the awakening in a parallel sense, the different vortices in the desire body, so that our thought, our feeling, and our etheric energy are all awakened harmoniously with each other as in relation to the rising of the creative energy after it has turned around and experienced the death-like state at the bottom of the spine. I don't want to talk a lot about this because I don't know a lot about it, because I am not an initiate. At least not that I know about. And if you're an initiate in the Western sense, you know about it, because that's what it's all about. So there's a river that is the resounding river. Gio is in the underworld. And you know this river is fed by? It's fed by Vergelmer, the fountain that we talked about in the very beginning. It is, to the Greeks, Lethe was the river of forgetfulness, which really it meant we forget the forward goingness, and we start remembering and letting go. Like what you say when you say, I forgot what I'm supposed to be doing today. I know I'm supposed to be doing. That's the kind of forgetfulness that the lethal river is like, or the resounding river, the Giol river. It's spelled G-I-O-L-L. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. So it represents then a descending. There are two rivers. You can look at it from 2 points of view. If you're looking at it from this point of view down here, the river of forgetfulness is we forget the divine and we think about the work that we have to do, that we want to do, coming into matter to do something completely new. Because the divine is old hat. We've already done that. God is God, and that is potential that has already been transformed into spirit, and to do something new, we have to have new experience. So we forget that which we already know and go into the unknown. From the other point of view, we come to the river that goes the other way, that runs down into the underworld. We forget all of the busy work of the world, and we start remembering what the divine was, and the more that we remember the divine in a beatific sense, the more our memories of the past fall away from us. And so the meaning of the river Giol is the same. It fits for both points of view. The bridge that crosses Giol, which I didn't take time to write down because I only had so much time to do these notes. It was only about 15 hours, so you know what you're in for. It was a river of gold. It was called the Echo. It was a bridge made of gold. It is the Echo Bridge. The gold, again, it's made of the stuff that we leave behind in the Northern European as well as in the Greek mythology. The land of the dead is a land of riches. There's a lot of gold that people leave behind themselves. And we can see this from two ways also. The bridge that gets us across, in one sense, is the intuitive soul consciousness. It's like a two-way communion, that memories of what has been before, looking from the bottom up, going on this side of the cycle, looking from the bottom up, the echo is we're getting the feedback. Things are being talked back to us from what we have done before. And this is the intuitive understanding that dissolves it and takes it, eats it all up, because it is from this that conscience is built, and it is from this that soul power is built by the talkback. On the other hand, on the downward stream, looking at the bridge going down the other way, the echo bridge, it is an echo more like what we see now. The world fights back, and each time we work more into the world, we get a feedback from the world that it's like, if you strike a hammer with a rock, it rings and the hammer jumps back. And the echo of things coming back to us showing that we're making an impression, or it seems sometimes like we're not making an impression on the realm of the unknown. So it works from both ways. So you cross either way, you cross the Golden River. Now, Modgood shows this as from a sexist point of view. Modgood is seen as a maid. And it's sort of like saying that the dweller is seen as our sexual opposite. And it's seen as a promise of new life in one way, as of when we're looking from the divine looking down, it's like a very fertile field, and we have a promise of a new life, and Modgood draws us as well as guards us into the underworld by the promise of an immortality. On the other hand, Modgood is seen as a dweller, as the whole principle of desire that leads to death, and that leads to all of this letting go. And so we have to face what we have, like really there's something terribly, I hate to use the Freudian term, there's something terribly anally retentive about evil. And there's something very hook-like about desire, that we hang on to it, and that we really want desire in nothing, the things that we desire in nothing but it. Some say the palace Niflhel is nearest to the river Gio, and that it was called Elvidnir, and that it was guarded by more than the walls and the gate. That the threshold of it was called Tholanda Forad, and that more than just the gate and the walls, and more than the Echo Bridge, and more than the Hound of Hell, and more than Modgood, that there was a great curtain that hung in front of it, which was called Blickjund Bol. Was it Blickjard Bol? No, it's Blickjund Bol. It is the curtain of illusion. Going either way into the underworld, we have to pass through illusion. That is the conceptions or the preconceptions that we have. Every time we change a realm of consciousness, we're thinking about it from where we have been and not where we are going. We hang on to the past, and an illusion is a self-centered preoccupation of thinking we know what the truth is, and it keeps us from seeing the reality as it is. Ultimately, coming down from the in either direction, it is the same as the curtain of Isis. And Isis is the wisdom that is behind the appearances of things. On one hand, Isis represents the absolute that is behind matter, that draws us to it all the time, but that we can never reach. On the other hand, Isis represents the divine wisdom of the spiritual realms when we pass through the illusion going on the upward arc. Remember, it says that I am Isis, who no one has seen, that no mortal can see. And the only way that we can lift the curtain of Isis is to become immortal. To pass through the curtain, to get to Niflhel, you had to know the formula. And the formula involved a puzzle or a question and a reverberative chant. And in short, it had something to do like the question is, what is the nature of this? as we pass into each succeeding realm, as we come into matter, we have the curiosity that leads to perception. We want to see what is really there. And there is sort of like the whole word that we chant is the divine creative word. And as we chant that creative word and as we pass through realm after realm, it's perception to see what is really there. To pass through the curtain going the other way, to become immortal, to go up, we don't look for perception because now perception has become illusion. And in this case, we look for meaning. Why is this whole burden of experience that I'm carrying? What does it mean? Have I wasted my life in vain in all kinds of trivial experiences? Is that grass that is along the sidewalk that I walked on, does that have a meaning? Does that have a purpose? Because I have so many images of that, like all of these little knife blades sticking up into the air. Does that have a meaning? And as we ask these questions and as we listen and raise our consciousness by attuning ourselves more and more to the divine, we get more and more answers. And that is, again, what brings us beyond the curtain of illusion into the underworld. You see, it's very difficult what we're trying to do. I understand I'm throwing a double curve at you by trying to look at it from both interpretations at the same time, but I got greedy. I figured it's the last night I can go all out and we can try and look at it from 2 or 3 parts all the time. So what happens is we have another mythical theme that we're just going to mention because we don't have the time to go into it, but we have the Discorii. That is one brother, Balder, who dies, and one brother, Hermod, who does not die. He does, I don't think, die even in the doom of the gods. And so here we have again the whole idea of polarity, that one dies and the other one goes down to its realm, into the realm of death to bring it life. And it's like saying that there is a kind of experience that to know it, not to have the intuitive all consciousness, but to know something, we vacillate back and forth between perception and memory. We vacillate back and forth between form and meaning, and that vacillation back and forth represents the two brothers that one lives and one dies, like the Discorii. There are 5 troops of the dead, or there are 5 elves. Now, we can look at this relative to the months of the year. We can see this as a cycle. At one time, before we got into this egocentric calendar where July and August, which were both for Julius and Augustus, were to have 31 months, there used to be 5 months of 31 days and 7 months of 30 days, which equals 365 days the same way. And the 5 months were the 5 months that were the winter part of the year. The 7 months of 30 days, the 210 days, were the days where all of the positive building work had to do. This is again the spectral completion. This is like the 5 months relate to like the 5 dark globes or the 5 dark keys on the piano when all of the assimilation work was done. And the days represent opportunities. The troops of the dark elves represented the days of each month. There were 155 of them all together. And those 5 troops, we're talking about the sun being taken into the underworld, into the world of the dead. We'll remember this and come back to it because it becomes very important for something we're going to talk about later when we get to the heavy stuff. Yeah. So, if we notice, Balder is put on the high platform right alongside of hell in the same way that Persephone was put on was in the castle of Hades. And it's sort of saying that this becomes the sun as the king of the underworld, or the midnight sun, when we withdraw from the physical activity and turn inward and see things spiritually. We will just skip the next aside because it has to do about riches from the underworld from both points of view, but I think we've done quite a bit with this. Now let's come back to that lovely poetic statement, and let's read it again. At the summons of the gods, all things did indeed weep for Balder, men and beasts, stones and metals, in the way that we see all things weep after frost, when the air grows warm again. Now that is not just poetry, that is leading us to where we want to go to understand this myth from one level of understanding. Who cries? Pisces cries. What happens in Pisces? Everything warms up, all of the frost melts away, and the world cries, and it cries in sacrifice because we've gone as far as we can. All of the stores are used up, and so literally this is the tears of Pisces. Now it's time to look back at something that we said we were going to look back at, and that's Hoder. Hoder was the blind god. Now the blind god was also the lawgiver. He was blind, and because he was blind, he could give the law without discrimination, indiscriminately. So he represents the Themis. Remember the Themis last year when we talked about all of those titanesses? Themis was the one that dispensed justice. There it is, Lady Justice, only the Norse see it as the blind god Hoder. And the blind god Hoder is the one that does the killing. The blind god Hoder is sort of like the Delilah that kills the sun for the new year. And there is, at the time of sunset, which is twilight, in the fall of the year, at the heliacal setting, what is sitting right above the heavens? But hell herself. She comes out of the underworld to the edge of the land of light in order to greet Balder and take him down into the underworld. So we see that this whole story is on one level of understanding. It tells the whole solar cycle, which is the cycle of the spirit, coming back down into the earth and accomplishing, and then at the moment of death being taken down into the underworld to become king of the underworld and being greeted by hell herself. So we have this goes on until there is a mournful repenting. We repent. We've eaten up the stores, which is the same thing as all of the memories that we have. And, we can't go any further without having new soul material, and so therefore we have to go back down again. At each of these 2 points that represent the 2 points of view of life and death, and life in one way, from one way of looking at it, it's definitely to be up here, to be in the world of in third heaven, in the world of abstract thought, because you're there and everything is beautiful, but you can't make it any better. You can't have any soul food unless you go forward again. And so this is the whole story. You see, there's something that drives the wheel and that turns the wheel again and again, and it is a different viewpoint. When we're humble, we're as humble as we can be at the beginning of this point, of the upward swing back into the realms of spirit. We're as proud as we can be in spirit. We're filled with the Jupiterian quality of the ideational thought at the other end of the cycle. But each of the two drive each other, and it's a really very, very beautiful process. If we can get to the point where we can rise above being attached to either point of view, then we can roll on the wheel without being caught in it. So we see this then, the cycle of Loki, because Loki is the one that guides Hoder. Loki stands above it all. See, Loki, Saturn, is exalted in Libra, and he's just in his joy. He's down in this deep, dark cave as the giantess, and refuses, when it's January, it refuses to thaw. It refuses to let things to come to tears. The Capricornian way can be extremely merciless. No tears, only if they're crocodile tears. It's that kind of consciousness. I don't mean anything personal about Capricorns about all of that. We're coming to that interpretation yet. All right. So we see that this represents a life and death cycle. We could also look at it as a light and darkness cycle, but we're not really attuned to all of the gradations of light as we are to all the gradations of life. And there is a whole color analogy that goes along with the cycle that we could look at it. But the story of the death of Balder and of Hermod's ride to hell is much more than that. It is because if it were like the story is here, there would be no new years. There would be no more rebirths. There would be no more progress. There would be no more soul power. There would be no more creativity. This has a definity about it. Loki refuses altogether, saying that things have gone as far as things can go, and death wins. But life wins by losing, and so we got to go a little bit deeper and look at it from another point of view. And I'm even starting to get tired here. My goodness, I got involved in all that mistletoe, and it put me into some kind of soporific state, so that I've lost all of the energy. It's not only in the case of death, whether we call death hell or whether we call death Hades, that sovereignty is respected. As mighty as all of the gods are, they never question the sovereignty of hell. The same thing is true in the story of Demeter and Persephone. None of the gods question Hades' ability to do what he does in taking Persephone and keeping her there. Vertically and horizontally, it is necessary that we respect the sovereignty and the power of each being in order for hierarchy to exist at all. We're back on hierarchy, which we're supposed to be talking about all the time here. We have to have a few little side trips, so otherwise it's no fun. It is respect for the domain and sovereignty that makes hierarchy possible, and it makes it functional. Without that, there would be nothing. And this sovereignty is founded, whether it is horizontal hierarchy or vertical hierarchy, it's founded in self-knowledge. And it's founded in assertion on the part of all of the participants in it. So then, the respect of sovereignty is a necessary consequence of definitive assertion. In this regard, this is an extension of the principle that we talked about when we talked about Re and Egyptian hierarchy. We said that the reason that the hierarchy was so well defined there was because the head was well defined. But the principle runs all the way through. You cannot have a rainbow where you have a well-defined red and not a well-defined blue. That each participant must live itself out. It must definitively assert itself. And when it does so in relation to a unified light, a ray-like consciousness that allows each one to do it, but it still does it. Good leaders make good followers, and good followers make good leaders. Good reds make good yellows and blues, and good yellows and blues make good reds. In short, the more true we are to ourselves, the more we allow others to be true. Because all of life is sort of a hierarchical dance. So the strength in the clear-cut decision made by hell makes hierarchical definition distinct. It makes the function, whether we're looking from the top down or from the bottom up, makes it all look all the same. Whether we like it or not, the atomacy of Loki follows the same principle. We may not like Shylocks, but we don't have the tragedy and the enormous bigness of spirit that is Portia of Belmont unless we have Shylock. Because there's nothing, the two are absolutely necessary to each other. However, that doesn't make destiny any easier. I don't have the entire picture of this principle yet, but it is a pretty straightforward principle of how hierarchy works. But our destiny is a reflection of our statement of ourself definitively. As clearly as we define ourselves, that clearly our destiny becomes. So that even the ashes of our destiny left behind show us. You've seen books that have been burned, where the paper is burned, and yet you can see the print on the paper. The ashes are there. Same thing is true with the net of Loki. That the net of Loki is his own experience of himself. How his character radiates from him so that even in its destruction it's still there. It's interesting to note in all of this that when Loki is caught, this is the viewpoint of Loki, of course. On the bottom is the viewpoint of Balder. That when Loki is caught, he's caught by the tail. You start with the last thing first, and then you unwind. And so it unwinds all the way up. How do you find out how you got onto the extraneous conversation? What did I say before this? And what did I say before that, and before that, and before that? And we trace things back to its source. And so when Loki gets caught, it's at first, he's caught by the tail, by the net of his own experience, the net of all of the tied together weavings and windings of his destiny. He's caught by the tail, and the last shall be first, which is just the way it works. This is another meaning of the last shall be first than what we've talked about before. But spiritual truth, we're talking about something 7-8 years ago. Spiritual things have a lot of meaning. So a lot of different ways that we can see them. Each of them is richer than the last, it seems. So again, we have the same thing when we began this course. We talked about Prometheus, who was a Titan, who was a defiant Titan, and no, we would lose the continuity of consciousness if we did. So I sometimes sit down for 5 hours straight when I'm doing the notes. Okay. So we have a Titan tied to a rock. I don't know why there were 3 rocks. Probably for the 3 material worlds, but I don't know for certain on that. It does, of course, mean dense material in that sense, but we won't talk about that. And I'm not also completely clear about why it was the entrails that were used to tie him down. I know that they're very strong, and I know that they have something to do with the introspective activity that points to the conscience, which is ruled by Saturn, and that kind of introspective turning back on things is important. Instead of an eagle ripping at the liver, we have a serpent, which is the symbol of cyclical time and eternity, and it's dripping poison, which is desire. That until he lets go of desire, he's going to be tied down and writhing. And there's no possibility of devious diversion. If you're hooked on desire, when you leave the physical and you enter the underworld, you're still going to, because remember, he's tied down deep beneath the mountains, and deep beneath the mountains is where he's feeling all of this pain. So basically what is being said here, and I think it's a reasonably good hypothesis, apart from all the esoteric meanings, it's saying that unrepentant, selfish, materialistic desire is the source of earthquakes. Now, from the Gospels, as well as the Apocalypse, earthquakes mark the beginning of the end, the onset of radical change, and that is the same thing that is in the destruction story of the Norse. And the destruction story of the Norse is called Ragnarok, though sometimes it's also called Alderrock. It's more Teutonic. So we'll read the story of Ragnarok, and we're just about out then. Ragnarok. There Loki must lie until Ragnarok, the time of the destruction of the gods. This fearful time will be ushered in by many portents. First there will be great wars through the world, and a time of strife and hatred between men. The bonds of kinship will hold them together no longer. They will commit appalling deeds of murder and incest. There will also be a period of bitter cold, when a terrible pursuing wolf catches the sun and devours her. The moon, too, is to be swallowed up, and the stars fall from the sky. The mountains will crash into fragments as the whole earth shakes and trembles, and the world tree quivers in the tumult. Now all the fettered monsters break loose. The wolf Fenrir advances. His great gaping jaws fill the gap between the earth and the sky, while the serpent emerges from the sea, blowing out poison. The sky rises to engulf the land, and on the flood the ship Naglfar is launched, a vessel made from the nails of dead men. Yeah, that's quite a story. The sea rises to engulf the land, and on the flood, we said that already, it carries a great crew of giants with Loki as their steersman. From the fiery realm of Muspel, Surt and his following ride out with shining swords, and the bridge Bifrost is shattered beneath their weight. His forces join the frost giants on the plain of Vergrid, and there the last battle will be fought between this mighty host and the gods. The note of Heimdall's horn arouses the Aesir to their danger, and Odin rides to the spring beneath the tree to take counsel of Mimir's head. Then he, with his chosen champions from Valhalla, goes out to the plain to encounter at last his ancient enemy, the wolf. Thor meets the world serpent, and Freyr fights against Surt. Tyr must encounter the hound Garm, broken loose from the underworld, while Heimdall does battle with Loki. All the gods must fall, and the monsters must be destroyed with them. Thor kills the serpent and then falls dead, overcome by its venom. Odin is devoured by Fenrir, but his young son Vidar slays the wolf in turn, setting one foot upon its jaw and tearing it asunder. Tyr and Heimdall both conquer their opponents, but they do not survive the struggle. Only Surt remains to the last to fling fire over the whole world, so that the race of men perishes with the gods, and all are finally engulfed in the overwhelming sea. The sun becomes dark, earth sinks in the sea, the shining stars slip out of the sky. Vapor and rage fiercely together till the leaping flame licks heaven itself. We'll take a little break there and try to get on to all of that. And try to get on to all of that in 45 minutes or 25 minutes or something like that. We note that what's happening here is a general disintegration. From the stuff, the very subtle stuff of love that holds the family together, to the molecular and atomic bonds that hold mountains together. It's a general disintegration. There are a number of ways that this can be understood, that each way seems to support and not contradict the other way. We'll look at it a little bit from a couple of ways. We note that in the Ragnarok itself, there is no time, or little time. Especially there is no linear time. This doesn't follow this and that doesn't follow that. It is as though we have gone as far as we can go with linear time. It's like we're seeing it from a removed point of view. If you're on a mountaintop and you're watching cars go on a highway, it seems like they're not going at all almost. They're so tremendously slow. And so Ragnarok is a view of things from an almost eternal point of view. There's no time. So this is happening over a great period of time or an instant. All is well. It doesn't make any difference. It's all one. Now, the state of disintegration is not a special case. It is the statement of the general involutionary condition. This is carrying it as far as it can go. If we remember, at the beginning of the entire creation of which we belong to, we started out as an all one. Most of us were all conscious, but not all self-conscious. We were all in that one state. And as involution continued, we became more and more separate, distinct, unique, specialized, and dependent. As we approach Ragnarok, we have reached something like a parallel asymptote where it's almost brought to infinity. That so much separation has taken place that it disintegrates the very atoms and the connections between them. And this is tied together with humans. And it is good. Like when we came into this material world with full consciousness, we developed the ability to precipitate thoughts And that precipitation resulted in the precipitation of the foggy, emotional Atlantean atmosphere, and then we could see things clearly. Now, by carrying that same process of individuation and discrimination and separation to its ultimate conclusion, more and more specialization, we carry it so far that our consciousness is tied together with the consciousnesses of the cosmos, and the bonds between atoms and molecules and everything that holds the world together as we know it is broken. We are part of the creative process. And it may seem terrible, but what we're doing is good, and it is part of it all. This deathly process, because the whole coming down to birth, down to the material world, is a process of death. And everything we do by analysis, which is death. We want to know what a cat's like inside or how it works inside. We kill it and see what's going on in there or what went on in there. We're always behind the time when you do analysis. But that is the kind of consciousness that is taking place. And it's meant to be. Because each of us is becoming, even each atom, if you think about it, not every atom goes down the Mississippi River to become silt and sink in the Gulf of Mexico. Some do and some don't. Others have different destinies. So everything from the atomic level to the human level has a unique and distinct experience. And this distinct experience enriches the cosmos for each and every other being. This is the same in spirit and in matter. So this brings us back to the intestines again, because the intestines are ruled by Virgo, and they're involved with this introspection and this analysis. In order for the food to be any use to us, it has to be broken down as far as possible. The two parts of alimentation are digestion, meaning breaking things apart, and assimilation, which is drawing in the things that are similar to the needs that you have. And so the intestines represent when the analysis has gone as far as it can go, and things have to be drawn in. But there has to be enough light to surround and incorporate the darkness, which is sort of like the fluids that are there. So there has to be enough particularization of everything in the cosmos. It has to be broken down far enough so that we have enough light to be able to surround it with our consciousness. We must subtend it in the same way that the Spirit of the Divine surrounds the planets and all of the globes. We have to do this with each particular element of experience that we go through and bring it in. So that's how it works from everything from sparks to dust. It also takes place on the human realm because on the level of individuation, at one time we belonged to races and to families and things like that. But in order for us to be assimilated voluntarily and to enter into the divine spirit, into the life spirit, we have to be individuated so that we are distinct from each and every other being with no special beholdenness or ties between us and anyone else. We have to become totally individuated. And unfortunately, some of that is, so we break down the race spirits, the cultural spirits, the family spirits, all of that. Then we can identify ourselves as unique individuals and children of the divine. However, some identify more with the creature than with the creator, and they associate more with the personality than with the individuality. So when the hierarchical controlling forces are broken down and we each become individuals, they become murderously and bellicosely competitive, or they become selfishly gratifying, and incest is the way that the family bonds are brought down, or warfare, or hatred, or murder, or things like that, which run rampant at the times of chaos he is because the identification is more with the creature than with the creator. I'm flying through this very fast. I got a whole bunch of ideas, and it's going to rip fast because we don't want to stay here forever. So the foundation of hierarchy itself must evolve. It's thoroughgoing so that even the formation of the hierarchy, the shape of the primordial atom has to evolve itself. So it's so fundamental that even the basic polarity of all polarities is shaken. That is, the Yggdrasil tree quivers. All of the monsters are loosed. That means all of the powers of the spirit that by reflective projection have become semi or subconscious instinctual nature forces and that are still tied to the darkness of the absolute are no longer held by the divine intelligences. It goes right down to the most fundamental creative things, fire and water. They're the basis. They represent, fire and water represent the spirit and the sea of the absolute. So this is a time that there is a renewal of creative forces just as much as there is a destruction. So this is again that whole Scorpio destructive consciousness where what dies becomes fertilizer for something new, or the turnaround when we in fact die and build a whole new spiritual essence. So this is a divine moment. And in divine moments, we have when hierarchy isn't always there, it's held together. When it isn't always there, there's a gap. In that gap is when we have intuitive growth. If we're constantly concentrated, without a gap, we have no intuitions. So we're right back to Gnunga gap again. But it is a time of trial. Can we float in the sea of instinctual desires by not be overcome by them? Can we float in the gap of time and space without sinking into the unconscious and without having to depend on someone outside of ourselves? So the big trial, in as big a letters as you can think of it, in the moment of truth, when you're just completely bare, you're not connected with anything, in that moment of destruction and of darkness, the test is faith, with as big a letters as you can make it. We must dive in and we must float. We must draw on that creative power in the black hole of our being that is our connection to the Absolute. See, the only way, there's a gap here. That's that gap that gives the insight at death, or that gap that gives us the creativity before coming back to birth. And that gap is the ultimate opportunity for creative freedom and for doing something altogether new. But in that gap, we have to be able to leap the gap without falling into where the gap then becomes the chasm, or is it the full void? In that gap, we have to leap. You know, there's the serpent of involution and the serpent of evolution. Between them is a gap. And there is a moment for all of us that not even the wisest teacher or the greatest God in the world knows the outcome, where we have to live on faith. And it is that living on faith that allows us to receive something from so deep within that I can't even talk about it. So that's the only way for us to get it. So this means we're tried by the forces that are our responsibilities within us, our own desires, our own urges, our own resistance. And it means we have to face all the moral dilemmas, and we have to look at unrestrained temptation, and we have to have faith in the goodness inside of ourselves, not on any creed, not on anything else. We have to trust the goodness inside of ourselves, especially at the destruction of the physical earth. Because this is as far as it goes. It's as down as far as it goes. And trusting in the good, if we go back to Plato, the good is the highest aspect of the divine spirit. When we trust in that in ourselves, then we can leap the gap. We have the faith that we can do it. We no longer are shielded by the incubation of the higher creative forces or by the laws of nature. Even the Titans. We have to stand before the gods and not be overwhelmed by them, and not be envious of all. The deathly side of passing through this is represented by Naglfar. It seems that evil lives after us. There is a notion that fingernails live after death, and that they continue to grow, and that hair continues to grow. What actually happens is the skin and everything else shrivels away, and we see the fingernail further back as it grows in. And it seems to be that the death, or that the evil has a will of its own. Oh my goodness! What time are we at? 9:41. All right. I promise I'll quit by 10 o'clock. No matter what. Now, it is a principle of the cosmos that there is a perfect reflection. We've talked about it before in terms of reflective projection, that our responsibilities in the unknown of matter is a perfect reflection of our waking consciousness, plus there is something unknown behind the illusion. And so, to keep you awake, I have brought you a picture of the divine reflected in the matter, in the macrocosm and the microcosm. And you can look at it and see the perfect reflection of which is which, because that's our topic for the next, at least 5 to 6 minutes anyway. So there's a perfect symmetry. And that symmetry carries into the very intensity of life and the very struggle of life. There is a cooperative adversary which is really ourself. And it passes across a center of being, and the reflection of the divine center is in what is called a beast or an antichrist. And this is Surt. Comes up from the underworld, as from the world of fire. And this is, so the Norse and the Apocalypse agree that there is like something that represents the center of dark intelligence, just as there is the center of divine intelligence. But they are both necessary. The adversary comes from below, and it actually crosses the rainbow bridge. It actually crosses the rainbow bridge, and it breaks it down. Now, this has a whole number of beings, a whole number of meanings. If the rainbow bridge is the electromagnetic spectrum, that means that it is grounded, that we become so given over to materialism that it grounds the energy. Everything gets shorted out. This is necessary in order for us to have new soul material, in order for us to grow, and in order for us to succeed, we have to take the enemy into ourselves. We have to allow them over the rainbow bridge. We literally take the stuff of matter into our bodies to digest it, going back to the intestines again. We have to overcome it by taking it into ourselves. The battle begins with the horn of Heimdall, which is the same as the trumpet of Revelation, which is another way of saying that we are now beginning to resonate to a higher level, and that resonance to the higher level is what is causing the dissolving of everything that has been condensed before. Heimdall is an interesting figure. He's another solar figure. Only he's sort of like Zeus Ammon. He's like a ram-like figure. He's bright and gracious. He's the son of 9 mother giantesses, which has something to do with the noetic noeric. We won't go into that because we don't have enough time. He sleeps less than a bird, wide awake consciousness. He can see 100 miles by night or by day, and he can hear grass growing and he can hear wood growing. Heimdall, who blows the horn, and he has golden teeth. He rides a gold-tufted steed called Gulltupper, but it is the ram that is really sacred to him, and it had to have been a ram's horn that was blown and no other horn that was blown. It has something to do with the ram as it's found in the zodiac. The star of Jeshur or Joshua or of Jesus is right at the beginning between the Pisces and Aries in the zodiac, and the horn, the Jeshua, when the walls come tumbling down, when Joshua blows the horn, the incarnation of Christ into the body of Jesus occurred when the equinox was at this point, and what is the disintegration began then with the raising of the vibration and the horn sounding. So it is indeed a ram's horn, but we don't have enough time to go into all of that. And so the battle begins. And the battle is such that the 5 elements, or the 5 major forces of the cosmos, are equally pitted against their opposite in the phenomenal realm. So Odin Wotan, after he takes the divine draught, fights Fenrir, which is thought versus desire. But he's actually devoured. There's a great deal of psychology in this, and we're going to whip right by it. But if you think about objects of desire, you are devoured by desire. Thought is always drawn to the object of its desire, but desire wins because the controlling force of thought is not enough. However, the sun, which represents the spawning, like the multiples of thought, eventually spawn beyond the desires and they are overcome. Many thoughts mount up to being more than one desire. Thor Donner versus the Midgard servant. Max Heindel very beautifully says that the lightning strikes the water. The water is electrolyzed into hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen is fixed onto nitrogen and comes down as nitric acid, which dissolves the bonds of the physical earth, and the hydrogen floats out into space. Hydrogen is most closely associated with the way the ethers manifest into the physical. It's the simplest atom. And so we have the spiritual fire meets with the water of space, And this is very important in another astrological sense, which we won't go into, but going all the way back into the most ancient astrology, Jupiter rules the watery triad, and sort of Zeus gives and gives and gives until he's dead. So Thor actually kills the Midgard serpent, but in so doing, he grounds himself. Tyr Tiu fights Garn, the hound of hell, and it's the vital life versus the death and the past. Vital life wins, but it dies in doing it. The past must die to be born anew, and so the gateway of hell, the gateway of Muspel, the land of hell, is opened, and things come in from the outside. The past overwhelms the present, and the present has to die. It gives everything that it has to overcoming death, but it can't do it because eventually the past becomes too much and you have to let go. Heimdall versus Loki. Heimdall, as we just said, is a figure of light, and it's light versus darkness, and it is yes over no, and wisdom wins over the cunning knowledge. Freyr fights against Surt, and Surt is a boar. This means that love versus discord, and love gives itself to the death, and it loses, but it wins by losing, as love always does. The gore wins, but in the process it loses. In short, there is a great neutralization, which means that the only way that there can be a dissolution of the world is for there to be a neutralization. Neutralization is necessary in order for the new soul material to be brought out. If we remember retrospection, we can remember things all we want, but unless we remember in such a way that the refeeling neutralizes the energy, those memories are going to hang around, and they're going to hang around and hang around, and they're going to bother us to neurotic obsession. They're going to bother us to perpetual desire. So there has to be neutralization. Actually, there's something a little more than neutralization. There is a balance between light and dark. There is a balance between good and evil. But in the long run, there is progress. There is always a little more cosmos over chaos. What has been gained isn't lost. So that gradually, even if it is very, very tiny increments, everything, the light wins over the darkness. And you know, this happens, that there is more daylight than there is darkness, because light bends. And we see the sun after it's already set. And if you look at this snake here very carefully, there's more summer than there is winter, because the earth is moving faster in winter, and so the days of winter, the amount of time spent in winter is shorter than the amount of time spent in summer. All of those are remembrances. It's just a very tiny amount, but that's all that's necessary. So ultimately, even though we die and fall asleep every day, and even though the cosmos dies and falls asleep, on the grandest level, there's always an increment. And ultimately there is that, optimistic positivity that keeps us going a little further. Which brings us to the point of the turnaround. In astrology, we say that there are two types of squares, a first square and a second square. The first square is a positive limits square. It is, we can only give so much effort, and that's it. When we're trying to condense something or build something with the square, we go as far as we can go, and that is a positive limit. We can't go any further. There's also a second square, and the second square is a negative limit square. It's like the relationship of on this. It's like the relationship of the cusp of Capricorn to the cusp of Aries rather than the relationship of the cusp of Aries to the cusp of Cancer. And the negative limit square works. You can go so far, but if you go beyond it, you wipe out. You know, like a positive limit of an automobile is if you're on a straightaway like the Bonneville Salt Flats, you can go as fast as you can go. The car can't go any faster. That's a positive limit. A negative limit is taking a car around the curve, and they're only so fast that you can go. If you go faster, you wipe out. When it comes to the end of the period, when the period of collapse is there, the square switches from the building stage to the constructive stage, to the destructive stage, from a first square to a second square. The cosmos is held in by the will being projected in as vectors that produces the field that become atoms. After a certain point, when the energy is projected beyond itself, and this is a very hard concept, when it goes beyond itself, everything collapses. And this takes us right back again to throwing boulders at Balder. It is a kind of overconfidence, and it is a kind of overgiving. It is the kind of thing where you give yourself beyond yourself, and even though it results in a collapse, that collapse is absolutely necessary to take you to the next level of existence. And this is what the whole turnaround is all about. So this is more than just neutralization. It brings us to our last topic, and that is going beyond itself. We have one topic hanging, and that is mentioned several times, and that is the ring Draupnir. This is a ring that was forged by Loki's dwarves when Loki was in the underworld. And what happens is, on the 9th night, it makes 8 new rings. And it also starts a whole new direction of revolutionary activity. I didn't realize. All right, we're going to whip really fast. All right, it goes right into an entirely new look at hierarchy. We've said that this is more than a solar myth. This is a cosmological myth. The thing that solar myths and cosmological myths have in common is that they are both cyclical. And now, at the very end, we finally get to the type of hierarchy that we haven't talked about altogether, and that is circular or cyclical hierarchy. In cosmology, everything is formed in periods of time into globes of space, and the interaction between time and space happens in revolutions of consciousness. In the Rosicrucian way of looking at it, in each period, there are 7 globes of space. They're called by letters A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And then they spin off to being a new ABC, only more deeply into matter. There are 7 manifests like the colors of the spectrum. And there are 7 revolutions around each of these globes, and there are 7 such periods. 3 descending, 3 ascending, and 1 at the base. I won't put this all up here. This is something very complicated, something we have spent several years going into. And in this, there is a dip into matter in which spirit is materialized, and there's a dip out of matter when matter is spiritualized, and there are rests in between. And because there are 7 globes, there are 8 nights in between them. So we have 8 nights. Now this can all be represented a different way, and this is the way that it is represented in the materialistic consciousness of the Norse, which is very scientific. There are 4 levels. 1, 2, 4, 8. The 1 divides itself to the 2nd level, and the 2 divide themselves to 4, and the 4 divide themselves to 8. So that the 8 nights between the 7 days can be seen another way, and the 8th level is where things are carried to a destruction and turn around, and they have to do with the globe D. And then the magic ring is such that on the 9th night it makes 8 new rings. So that after this is over, it makes 8 new rings. It makes 7 new rings again, and it proceeds that same way. So what we're talking about here is a way of looking at the 8th sphere, because there can only be 4 levels, because 4 is the number of complete construction. So there is a relationship between geometry and the 4 levels of the globes that as they form in matter, so that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and the 4th is the 2 squares looked at from 2 points of view, one being the positive square, one being the negative square, and the whole turnaround is found in that. And all right, now these themselves, the 8 periods form a formation that is, the 7 periods make a formation that is like each of the 7 globes. So that in the D is the Earth period, which we are in right now. And in this Earth period, we are in globe D of the Earth period, and we are in the 4th revolution on the 4th level, meaning to say that the turnaround of the whole business is imminent. And that means where we are right now in the cosmos is we are at this time where the gap of all gaps in the whole of creation, where we are being separated down as far as the separation can go, and we are the ones that will be producing the new set of rings, only the new set of rings will be a higher set of rings. Part of the shooting the gap is living a life of faith. But living that life of faith means that the same thing that happens to us has to be what happened to the gods. We have to give of ourselves unto death and then some. It isn't just that we neutralize things, but that we go beyond. And when we go beyond, that causes the collapse. I'm not talking about foolhardiness or anything like that. It's just that we have to realize that there is something more in us than even we can conceive in our potential. When we have faith in that, and when we give ourselves in that way, we give to the point that we lose, and we win by losing, and that is what causes the turnaround. And that is an extremely, extremely important point. And it means then, to go back to Balder and the magpie, it means that our piebald horse has to have a little bit more white than it has black. And the white has to surround. We could go out now and perhaps find one and know which was the right horse to choose, because it had to have a predominance of white over black, and the white addressed itself in such a way that it gives itself over, so that even though it looks like there's more black, it gives itself with such light that it gives itself over to the black and wins. All right, now we have one little paragraph to read yet, and that is the end. Yet this is not the end. Earth will rise again from the waves, fertile, green, and fair as never before, cleansed of its sufferings and evil. The sons of the great gods still remain alive, and Balder will return from the dead to reign with them. They will rule a new universe, cleansed and regenerated, while two living creatures who have sheltered from the destruction of the world tree will come out to replenish the world with men and women. A new sun, outshining her mother in beauty, will journey across the heavens. Such is the picture of the beginning and end of the world of gods and men as drawn for Gangleri by the three powers. Meaning to say that, dark as it may all seem, we have to give ourselves beyond ourselves, and when we do, everything is born again. This is a little bit materialistic because we know it's a different kind of a sun, it's a different kind of earth. But, okay, that's all we have to say. There was a lot more, but I couldn't do everything. We got the essential Norse mythology. Any questions for 2-hour answers?